phasing in Revit can be a daunting task for consulting engineers. So not only do the architects have a lot of planning and careful management to think about, so do the structural and the MEP engineers. So in part 2 of this series, we're going to look at how we can use collaboration tips to make sure that all the data is transferred equally among the files and utilized consistently. We're also going to explore documentation tips when actually documenting your building model with regards to phasing. So let's start off by looking at collaboration tips. One of the things that you typically do as a consulting engineer is link in the architect's model. You can see here in my structural plan view of the first floor the LinkedIn architectural model. And one thing you should be aware of with this link file is that there are some parameters within its type. So if I select this link file, I'm going to come up to edit type on the properties here, and you'll notice that there's this one parameter that I want to look at very closely, which is phase mapping. So when I look at phase mapping here, I can hit this edit button with regards to the link file and make sure that the host file, which is my structural model in this case, is phase mapped properly to the linked architectural model. And we can see quite clearly that it is not. There is 3 phases in the architect's file and only 2 inside the structural model. So what we need to do is make sure that we get these phases lined up properly, or else our views are going to display incorrectly, thus giving us incorrect documentation. Another problem that will occur is with project information. Typically the engineers will get a copy of the architect's title block family, and we want to make sure that the project data is consistent between all the architectural engineering models, so that the title blocks are labeled consistently in the construction set. So if I go to the Manage tab here, you'll notice that in the project information dialog here that none of the data is filled out in my structural model. So how do we get this to be consistent and synchronized across both files? Well, we're going to use a tool called the Transfer Project Standards tool. It's located on your Manage tab on the Settings panel here. And when I launch this dialog, you can see that I'm going to be copying the information out of the architect's file. Now I can copy a lot of stuff out of there with regards to system settings, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that I don't bring everything over, so I'll select Check Done here. Now I want to go and specifically bring over specific data regarding phasing and project data. So I'll come down here to the P's, everything's alphabetical, and I'll check the box for phase settings. What this will do is bring over the graphical overrides from the architect's file for my phases. Unfortunately, I'll have to go and manually set up my phases to match across the files because it's a current limitation within the software. Hopefully in the future they'll rectify this issue. Also, the phase filters will have to be manually managed. But on the other hand, project information I can bring over too. So we're going to bring over the project data for our scheduling needs, which will help us in our documentation tips. So let's take a look here at what happens when we hit OK. Revit will notice that there are several items in here that have duplicate information, and it's asking me what do I want to do. Well, I'm going to overwrite the information. So now that that's been done, if I come up here to project information again, I'll see that the data from the architect's file has made its way into my structural model. And I can give it a new job number for my company here, but I'm just going to cancel out of there and then take a look at phases. So you'll notice that the phases are incorrect still, as well as the phase filters, because if you recall in part 1 we actually made temporary objects for show previous and demo here visible with overrides. And last but not least, the graphical overrides did come over, and you can see there's our hatch pattern that we created in our architectural file. So this does come over through the transfer utility, but the other 2 tabs of information do not. So let's start with the phase filters. We know we want to display temporary objects in the previous and demo phase filter, and obviously we want to make sure that our phase is mapped, so we want to make sure that they're clearly the same as what the architect has. And you can leave out the descriptions, you can add them in. I'm just going to put the dates just for clarity, so we know that was 1998, and we'll add another phase in there, phase 2, which will be 2012. Okay, so we know that this was the original structure. The 1998 event was the interior demolition and renovation, and we know that the 2012 was a new addition. Now that that's been established, I can hit OK, and if I select the link file again this time, when I go into the type properties of the link file and edit the phase mapping parameter, I can actually map phase 1 to phase 1 and phase 2 to phase 2, and existing are already established. So I'm good to go here. So a little tip there when beginning your consulting process to make sure that your phase mapping is established, and to do that a little bit more quickly, use the transfer project standards utility to get at least some of this, if not most of the settings across. Alright, now that we have that set up, what we want to do is look at how engineers would potentially like to work while they're working with the architect. If you haven't done so already, just in a standard new construction workflow, it's more apparent in a phased project to create coordination views, because there's so much information flowing through these models that it helps to break it down into its bare essentials. So let's take a look at coordination views. You'll notice that this view here, the existing level 1 plan for structure, is set to the structural discipline, and this does a lot of kooky things to the display of architectural elements. If things are not load bearing, they do not display, and other odd things that show up are doors with no walls. So you get some graphical informalities here when you work with an architectural background, and we're going to rectify that in a minute. So let's take a look at how we can create coordination views to see what the architect's intent is. I'll just start by duplicating the existing level here. So I'll just duplicate that view. And just like I did before in part 1 of the series, I'm going to go give it a name to kind of iron out some simple little verbatim here. So I'll just add A for architectural existing. And then I'll come down and make sure that my phase settings are correct, which they are. But here's the trick. When you link in a model, you actually can link in the views from that model too. So if you do not purge the views out of the linked file before you link it in, you can actually utilize them. And that's what I'm going to do here. So if I go to the visibility graphics on the properties here and edit them, I can come down to the Revit Links tab, and you'll notice that my view AE at level 1 is actually driving the display settings of the link file right now. But I'm going to give that a second thought here by using a linked view. So I'm in a subset dialog now of the linked file, and I'm actually going to view a linked view from that model, which will happen to be my particular view here for new construction here. So I'll just say new construction phase 1, level 1, and that'll actually display the view from the architect file. So if I hit OK and I hit OK again, you'll see that now I'm seeing the architectural file as if I was in the architectural project. And again, I'll just rename this for more clarity. So I'm going to say new, and then maybe change it to phase 1. And then change my phase settings down here to phase 1 and show previous and new. So there you have it. That's a quick way to set it up. And if I don't want to use the structural discipline here, I can actually drop it out into a common discipline, which is coordination. And this makes everything look equal. And I can see quite clearly that my view range is actually messing up my view here of the architect's file, so I can go manipulate that right here on the properties by changing it back to what the architect would probably see in their model. So I'll just use the standard settings from Revit Architecture here for architectural views, and when I hit apply, it's the same kind of distinct look that I saw back in Revit Architecture. So now I have a coordination view of the model inside of my project, and if I look here under structural plans, there it is under phase 1, and then I can duplicate that. So let's see what the architect was intending to knock down in this view. So let's duplicate that view, and let's just give it a rename here. So we're going to do demo, hit OK, and again I'll return to my phase filter to show previous and demo, and then I'll set my visibility graphics here to show the Revit link using the linked view for demo phase 1 floor plan from that file. And when I come out, there's the demo plan that the architect has created in their file. So this lets me see what the architect's intent was moving forward into my project, and I can do this for a lot of phases. So when I look at this phase, my structure probably will not be impacted by this. So let's say that we just move it ahead a step. So let's say we change it up. Let's make this phase 2. And then we come down here and set these settings to phase 2. Now the only thing I got to do different here is my visibility graphics for the link file. So I need to go in there and change which view it's seeing. In this case it's seeing phase 1 demo, so let's say we want to see phase 2 demo. And now I can clearly see that the architect has demolished a wall over here, which might impact my roof design. And likewise down here, I might go change this up now and rename that properly to phase 2, and then move it into phase 2 with the phase settings down here. And last but not least, change the visibility graphics to show the linked view from that model for phase 2 level 1. And now I can see the addition that the architect plans to put on. Alright, now that's a quick little tip there that you can utilize to create coordination views to help you see what the architect's intent was, and thus drive your design intent for how you're going to structure the building, or duct it, or pipe it, or power it. So let's move forward now that we know a little bit more about the building and set up our structural views. So just like we did in Revit Architecture in part 1, we're going to duplicate these views. And I'm going to go ahead and start by setting up its phase. I'm going to make this the demo plan. And I'm just going to call it D-phase 2. Okay, so make sure that our phase is right, phase 2. There we go. And I can actually see where the demolition is going to occur. And I've already got my existing foundation work in here, so I can see how that's impacted. So now I can get rid of this existing view here. And same thing with the roof plan, so I'm going to need a roof plan here, so I'll duplicate that. Again, set the phase to phase 2 to show previous and demo. So if any roof demolition occurred in the architect's file, I can see it. And again, D phase 2 for the name. I have my views set up to phase so that they're organizing properly. And there we go for that. So I can now close this view. My 3D views aren't going to be something I'm going to skip either, so I'm going to duplicate those. And I might as well make 2 of them. And this one could be my new one for phase 2. And I'll go down and check my phase settings down here to show new and previous. Okay, and then the other one underneath, I did change that one already. Let's change the copy over here. There we go. Let's change this one to demo for phase 2, and show previous and demo and phase 2. So you can see how quickly I can amass detail views for my display here. And I'm just going to close down some of the existing stuff and retile. So now that I know a little bit more about my building, I need to make new plans for my floor plans for my roof and my plan view. So I'm going to duplicate my plan view real quick. And we'll give that an N designator, and the filter will show previous and new. There we go. And then last but not least, my roof design needs to be duplicated to show previous and new, and then change the name to new. So there we have it. We're good to go, and we can begin to progress through the design here. So that's how we can set up our views for coordinating with the architect. And what we're going to have to do now is start to build in some design criteria here for making these radical addition changes to the building. And one thing I know is going to happen here is that it looks like the architect is turning the roof and going to bear on top of this area, which is being knocked down in my demo view. So I'm going to have to support that somehow. So we're going to add a temporary structure in here. So to do that, I'm going to go into my plan view, and I'm going to start my wall command. So I'll run my wall command, and I'm going to pick just a generic wall. In this case, let's say a 6-inch wall, and I'm going to set the height to go up from that floor to the level 2 work plane or level 2 object, and we'll do wall center line. So because I'm in level 1's phase 2 view, anything I create here is going to be new. So I'm just going to create a wall right there to take the load of the roof temporarily. So the wall will appear as a new object, and you'll notice that in the properties when I select it, it was created in phase 2. But what I can do is I can make it a temporary object by selecting phase demolished here and saying that it was also demolished in phase 2. And now it'll disappear in my new plan, but over in my demo plan for my first floor level, if I open that up real quick, you'll see that there's the temporary object. So it's displaying right because I modified my phase filters, and I'm ready to go. Alright, so now that I used up my demolition work, views, I'm pretty much ready to go and work on new construction. So one of the things that you can do to make things faster for yourself to get this model of this addition underway is actually to copy it out of the architects file. Alright, and there's a couple ways you can do that. You can use the copy monitor tool, alright, which is really nice, but in some cases that could be very performance heavy. So what I'm going to do is use a low-tech version of copy monitor, which is tabbing through the linked file. So using my 3D view here, I'm going to tab through the linked file and add to the selection these 3 new walls on the outside. And these 3 walls are showing up because in the architect's model you can see here that they're bearing. It also allows me to copy the original wall type out. And last but not least, I'm going to tab down to the roof and copy that out of the architect's link file. So these are the linked walls and roofs in the architect's file, and I just want to pull them across to my model in this case. So now that I have them selected, I'm going to use this tip to copy it out to the clipboard, and then after I'm done that, I'm just going to pull down my menu here and I'll paste it right in the same spot. And I'll just hit OK to the duplicate warnings here. And now I have it. So really all I got to do in my views now is turn off the display of the architect's link file. And you can see it left behind the objects which I needed from their file, and I can go and create my foundations and slab underneath that. I can go tie in the roof. So real quick, if I want to tie in the roof, I'll just go up to my Modify tab, pick my Roof Join command here on the Geometry panel, and then pick the edge of that new roof and the surface of the old roof, and there we go. I got my tie-in to the new structure. Also, if I go into my plan views, I can turn off the link file as well, because I don't really need those for my plan views. I just need to see what's relevant. And then likewise over here on my roof plan, turn off the link file. And there I can see that information. I can turn off the doors as well. So if I go to my doors category here, inside the structural categories, so I'll just have to turn on the other categories from the other models and just uncheck doors, and there we go. So now I have my structural plans ready and geared up to go for collaboration. If I so desire, now I can go to Collaborate, Copy Monitor, and just monitor the new walls to the old walls from the architect's file, and this will save me a lot of design time when it goes to construction documents. Alright, let's move forward with documentation tips now, and I'm going to jump over to Revit MEP. And Revit MEP has a sister component to the room object of the architect called the space, and the space basically functions as a analytical model in the MEP environment, whereas a room actually functions as a finish container for architectural design finishes and square footages and things of that nature. It also can serve as energy modeling analysis data for the architects at a lower scale than the engineering data that's stored in the space. But one of the things here again is to make sure that the linked model has been phase mapped. So if I select the link here and I go to edit type, I want to make sure that the MEP engineers have done the same thing that the structural engineers would have to go through. And not only that, make sure that their model is room bounding. So what this will do is it'll actually detect the walls of the architect's file so I can place my spaces. So here's phase 1 of the project, and you can see that I've located several spaces in the model already. The blue space in here is actually the linked-in room from the architect's file, so I haven't put a space in this area. I also have coordination views set up in the MEP model, just like the tip I showed you earlier, to see what the architect's intent is as far as demolition is concerned, and this helps to drive my decisions for my MEP systems, which need to be either removed and renovated or completely installed new. So let's talk about this space thing. If I go to my Home tab in MEP, you'll notice that the space tool isn't here like it would be in architecture. The tool is actually on the Analyze tab. So if I pick the space tool here, it's kind of like working with the room tool. I have to set my upper limit, I have to set my offset, and just like in architecture, I created a program of spaces. So I got a list of the architect's rooms for phase 1, and I had to go and create them just like I would in architecture. So I created a program list. You can see it down here in my schedule and quantities area of my browser, and I'm going to pick the one that's not placed, which is OpenOffice 111, and I'll just place it right in there like that. Now that's phase 1 views. Let's take a look at phase 2. So if I open up the plan for that, here's the demo plan, and then here's the actual coordination plan for the floor. Alright, you can see that the break room has not been accounted for yet, and I can see that the architect is doing a little work in the break room as far as new construction is concerned. So I got to go add the space in there, and because this is phase 2 now, the space will actually be assigned to phase 2, just like a room would be in architecture. So I'm going to go pick the break room from my program. I'm going to place it in this view, so I can make sure the settings are set up for that view, not the other one. And I'll just drop it in there. So what does that do for the engineer? Well, the engineer can check the heating and cooling loads at both phases of the project now. So if I go to my heating and cooling loads tool on the Analyze tab here, I can actually see the analytical model here for phase 1, and there it is. So these are the spaces assigned to phase 1. And then I can go over here and run the analysis. And once I'm done the analysis for phase 1 and I move into the future now to 2012 for phase 2, I can change the phase that I'm working with here to phase 2 and then calculate the loads for that particular design. So it's very, very helpful to set up your spaces just like you did your rooms in architecture. Of course, we got to take into account a lot more when it comes to volumes, but we get the same results across the disciplines. So phase mapping will help with that to come across very clearly. Alright, now let's talk about those documentation tips when it comes to your construction documents. If we take a look at the HVAC plans here for phase 1, so I'm going to open up the floor plans here for the demolition view. Okay, so here's the demolition plan for phase 1, and you can see that I have tags on some of the duct and the air terminals that have been demolished here. And these are actually called keynotes. More specifically, they're user-defined keynotes. And what's nice about this is I can create the description which the note calls out. So down here in my Legends branch, I have an HVAC demolition sequencing note legend. So if I open that up, you can see what M1, M2, and M3 refer to. But where did this come from? That's the real question. So to use this tip, I need to open up the Keynote text file for this project. So I'll go out and find that file real quick, so bear with me. And you'll see it's just a comma delimited text file, which I call demolition keynotes. So I'll open this up, and one thing to keep in mind here with the keynote files is that you can only have one per project. Okay, so if you have your disciplines segregated into multiple files, you can actually have separate files then. But if you have all your disciplines under one file, you have to use one common keynote file. So with that being said, you can see here that I've actually added in some electrical keynotes. So it's real easy to do. I can go in here and add a new subcategory or main category. So the first three here are what we call the main categories, which define the M, the E, the P. And then I got subcategories of M, E, and P here, which I call M1, M2, M3, as well as E2, E1, and P2, P1. So these are actually assigned, as you can see here at the end, to the main category that you see up here. So let's say over here that we want to make sure that existing power connections are capped off. And after I hit the tab key, I want to assign it to the E category, so I'm just going to type an E here after I tab in that line, and now I can save the file. So annotating or customizing the Keynote file can be done throughout the project process as you need more and more notes, and then just save it. Now once that's been done, I have to come back into Revit MEP here, and I have to go to the Annotate tab, down here to the Tag menu pull down for the panel, and open up Keynote Settings. And once I do that, I need to browse to that file again. So I just need to reload it kind of. Now the pad type, you have options here. So I can use any one of these options. My numbering method, I can do it by the note or by the sheet, so the sequence on the sheet or the actual sequence of the notes. So you can choose which way you want to do it in your company. I'm doing it by Keynote for now. And then let's take a look at how it works. So I'm going to use power for this. So under phase 1 here, actually let's go to phase 2. So let's go to power, phase 2 demo. There we go. So you can see in here that we probably don't have much in terms of demolition sequencing for the power plan, but if I go to the lighting plan, maybe we might have some things we might need to note up. There we go. We got some lights that have been demolished. So we're going to have to make sure that things are accounted for by tagging these. So how do I tag them once I got the view that I need? I simply come up here to my keynote command on my annotate tab, pull it down, and I select user keynote. And here I got a custom tag family I made with a keynote inside of it to pull up the keynote number. So it's just a label inside of that family, and if I come over here to this item, I can tag it now. And let's just use attached end, so I'll just do that, and what happens is it brings up that keynote file, and there you go. So if I pull down E, I can see that I need to remove an existing light fixture, so I'll pick E2, and the same thing here will be E2. Now I just have to put another one in, let's say, so why don't we just tag the power panel here, and let's just say that's going to be E3 to cap off all existing power connections, so that we don't have any loose wires electrifying people. You'll notice here I have a switch that needs to be noted up as well. So if I just go back to my keynote file, I can add a line item in there for removing existing light switches here and here, because this is going to be demolished walls. So with that being said, now I got to make a legend. So how do I make the legend for my electrical nodes here? Well, it's quite simple. I go to my View tab, and on the View tab I can create a legend called a keynote legend. So I'll select keynote legend here, and let's call it electrical demolition sequencing nodes. And you'll see that the legend's pretty much set up to go out of the gate. I don't have to do much to it, but the one thing I do want to do is actually filter my legend so that I only get the E nodes. So I'm going to pick key value here as my filtering object inside of my schedule, and then I'm going to make sure that it uses or contains, let's say, the letter E. So I'm going to make sure it's a capital E, and when I hit OK, I only get the electrical nodes. And now I can drop this on as many of my sheets as I need to see these nodes for my view. So that's actually using keynoting as a tip to expedite your particular sequencing nodes, or note blocks, or sheet nodes as you call them, in your project. Alright, now that we're done that, we got to tackle another issue that comes up very often with our help desk support, which is the sheet numbering. Now in Revit doesn't like to have views with the same number or name. You've probably encountered this before. So for example here, you'll notice that I actually have two sheets called M1, and I'm going to get to the point of how I did that, but first let's just see what error I get if I make an E1 for phase 2. So I'm going to create a new sheet here using my title block template from the architect, and if I go and renumber this by clicking on E2 here and type in E-1, enter, you'll see that Revit gives me a warning saying that it has to be a unique number. I can't do this because it already exists right here. So let's just hit cancel and look at the current workaround. The workaround is quite simple. It's kind of a hidden Easter egg for that matter. If I select E2 and then I go edit the text box, I'm just going to change the 2 to a 1, and here's the tip. Right click inside there and insert a Unicode control character. And you can use any one of these because Revit doesn't see these on the interface. So if I pick RS here, for example, a record separator, and I hit enter, it allows me to go through with the name to be the same. So now I just need to rename the sheet to be phase 2 electrical plans. And there you have it. So now I have two E1s in my set, one for phase 1 and one for phase 2. So if you have to submit the same sheet for each phase, that's how we do it now. Alright, so in certain operating systems you can do this, and others you cannot. So just verify that your operating system can do that workaround for that little tip. Okay, now if I look at E1 here, you'll notice that I have my layouts for phase 1 here, which refer to my power and lighting plans, and they're in a specific location on the sheet. Much like if I open up my phase 1 plans for HVAC, they're in the same location here, and most people don't know that you can actually line these up sheet to sheet very easily using a tool called the guide grid. So in the case of this electrical E1 sheet for phase 1, I have a guide grid already in place called plans, and when I turn it on in the properties of the sheet, you can actually see the blue grid show up right here, and you'll notice that I have the corner of the lower left corner of the building anchored on one of the grid nodes. And what this allows me to do is to make sure that all my sheets are formatted identically. Okay, So if I go to my new sheet E1 here and turn on the plans guide grid, there it is. And the guide grid is pretty simple to work with. If I just tab and select it here, I got grips to edit the shape of it from side to side, up and down. I also have the ability to change its formatting a little bit, so I can change the size of the cells here as well to meet my needs. So once I got the guide grid in place, I can start dropping views on here. So the views I want to drop here are going to be the power and lighting plans for demolition and power. So if I refer back to E1 here, I had power across the top and lighting across the bottom. So if I use that technique on my phase 2 sheet here, I'll put power across the top, so I'll put my demo plan in here, and you'll see that I can just drop it anywhere for now. But what I had to do is, in one of my views, put in some reference planes, because you can't really snap to the corner of model elements, so you have to put datum elements in there to snap to. And once I pick this viewport and I use the move command, I can actually snap to the endpoints of that reference plane and then pull it to the grid node where it needs to be located. And that's how I get the identical look from sheet to sheet. Now I just need to manipulate the length of the line here and move on to the next view. So the next view will be new construction. I'll just drop it on there anywhere. You'll notice that when I move it, I can actually get it to line up left to right, but getting it over to this corner right here, I just simply need to pick it again and use the move command, and once again connect to that snap point on that reference plane and pull it over, and likewise change the length of the grip here on the end. So I'll go ahead and add the lighting on now, so I'll just put lighting on. You'll see that it lines up vertically this time, and I'll just drop the new on while I'm at it, and we'll do the finite alignments after we got these all in place. So I'll just put it there for now, and if I go and move this one, I can just move it down now from that point to there, and the same thing over here. So I'll pick this viewpoint and move it down from here to here, and I might have to use my snap override there, SI, to snap to intersection, and then modify the lengths of the lines to match the ones above. So formatting sheets from different sheets to different disciplines, for that matter, can be consistently managed using the guide grids here. Also, you'll notice that the names on my title marks do not coincide with the name of the views that I have here on my browser. So one last tip that I can offer you here is modify the view list that you create from your previous tips from part 1. So I'll open up the view list here, and you'll notice that I've appended it to incorporate some of the sheet data. So if these views are on sheets, what I can do here is come in here and manually type in names for the titles of those views. So the title on the viewport will override the actual view name once it's placed on the sheet. And this is a good way for me to track which views are on sheets as well. So incorporating that view list tip from part 1 and updating it for sheet documentation can really go a long way to manage your sheets as well. Now, the last thing I want to put on here is those sequencing notes that I've created from my Keynote file, but let's just turn off the guide grid for clarity. There you go, and let's go put our electrical demolition sequencing notes on the sheet, and I can just reformat the legend like so. Okay, and if I want to modify it, I can come in here and basically change its appearance. So I'll get rid of the blank row, turn off the headers, and there we go. That's more like it. Okay, so that's actually coordinating your views from sheet to sheet, discipline to discipline. The last thing that you might want to look at as an additional tip here is organizing your sheets by phase. And this is a limitation in the software right now. We saw how easy it was to do with views at the top here. Alright, so we have a phase type for views up at the top, but we don't have one for sheets. Alright, so if I go to the View tab here and look at the user interface browser organization, there isn't one for sheets that are based on phase, so I need to create one. But before I can get that far, I need to make a parameter for my sheets. So this involves going to the Manage tab and creating a project parameter called Sheet Phase. And the nice thing about project parameters is they can be scheduled. I'm going to make it a simple text type of parameter, and I'll just keep it loosely under General. And last but not least, I'll assign it as an instance to Sheets. So there we go. And Revit will ask me for a default value, so let's just say phase 1. Okay? And now if I hit OK, when I look at properties of my sheet here for phase 2, you'll see there's my new parameter under General. and I can come in here and type in phase 2. Okay, but probably just like we did with the views of the model, we can do this with sheets. We can make what is called a sheet list. So if I right click on schedules, I'm going to make a new sheet list, and then I'll start to pull up the data about sheets. So guess what's in here? Sheet phase, the custom parameter I made. I'll add that, the number, the name. I'll sort it by number, actually by phase first, and let's leave a header and a blank line, and then by number. Okay, so if I hit OK now, you'll see that I can do the same thing I did with views, but only with sheets in here, and just customize it a little bit. And this can also be used for your cover sheets, okay? You can hide those headers, but what's really cool is once you're in here, you can actually pick the phases that the sheets are assigned to. So if I say this is assigned to phase 2, it hops down here, and then these will be assigned to phase 1. And there you have it. So as I move my sheets into each phase value here, I can group them logically. I can also group them by discipline or subdiscipline, so I can go and add custom parameters that way in terms of MEP. But now I got my browser problem. So I've solved one issue, but now I gotta solve the other. So here's the last tip for organizing the sheets, which is setting up the view type. So I'll go up here to my view tab. I'll select user interface and back to keyboard short. Oh, not that one. I want to go to browser organization, and I'm gonna go in there and select sheets, and then I'm gonna create a new one, which I'm gonna call phase. And again, in here I'm going to set it up to do it by sheet phase first, then by sheet number. And I already have it down at the bottom, so I'll just hit none here. And then if I hit OK and I change it to phase now, you'll see what happens. So here you'll see my sheet phase group, and if I look underneath, there's phase 1 and phase 2, which I've conveniently entered into my sheet list here, and my views of my sheets are now organized. I can go even further by putting in sheet subdiscipline or whatever to organize this further by M's and E's and P's, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to do here. So hopefully that helps you with navigating phases effectively when it comes to collaboration and documentation.